I know how to use a knife real well. Real well. These were the chilling words spoken by a 16-year-old boy who would soon be at the center of one of the most disturbing murder investigations in Montana history. In a modest home just miles from downtown Pinecrest, a mother's body lay brutally disfigured beyond recognition while her teenage son methodically crafted a story of innocence. No one knew what had happened behind those closed doors. No one knew how quickly a troubled mind could snap. And the killer believed no one would ever see through his carefully constructed lies. Welcome to Silent Crime Witness. Thank you for joining us today. If you're new here, we truly appreciate you taking the time to watch. Please hit that subscribe button to support our channel as we bring these important stories to light, and comment your location below so we can see where our community is watching from around the world. Today, we dive into the dark reality of familial homicide, where the line between fiction and reality can disappear with devastating consequences. The human mind has an incredible capacity for compartmentalization. But as you're about to discover, sometimes the person most dangerous to you is the one you've raised from birth. January 24, 2007. A cold winter night in Pinecrest, Montana. The temperature had dropped well below freezing as darkness settled over the quiet suburban neighborhood. Inside the modest home on Oakwood Drive, 42-year-old Rebecca Harmon, known to friends and family as Becky, was preparing for bed. A dedicated nurse and single mother, she had spent the day caring for patients at Pinecrest Memorial Hospital before returning home to her teenage son. That son, 16-year-old Lucas Harmon, was in his room, the glow of his computer screen illuminating his face as he immersed himself in a world far removed from the quiet Montana suburb. On his screen played scenes from his favorite film, American Psycho, the controversial psychological horror movie based on Bret Easton Ellis's novel about a Wall Street investment banker who leads a secret life as a sadistic serial killer. It wasn't the first time Lucas had watched the film. According to friends, he had seen it dozens of times, often quoting lines verbatim and expressing admiration for the main character, Patrick Bateman. What no one realized was that Lucas's fascination with the fictional killer had evolved from casual interest to dangerous obsession. The warning signs were there, explained Dr. Melissa Turner, a forensic psychologist who would later evaluate Lucas. His fixation on a character who represents the ultimate compartmentalized life, successful professional by day, brutal killer by night, should have raised serious concerns. At approximately 11:30 p.m., Becky knocked on her son's bedroom door. According to neighbors, the mother and son had been arguing more frequently in recent months, often about Lucas's declining grades, his increasingly concerning choice in entertainment, and his sudden interest in bodybuilding. What happened next would remain unknown until the following morning, when a series of events would set in motion one of the most disturbing murder investigations in Pinecrest's history. In the early morning hours of January 25, 2007, Thomas Harmon was frantically woken by his current wife. She told him that his son, Lucas, had arrived at their house in a state of extreme distress. Lucas had apparently walked several miles in freezing temperatures to reach his father's home, claiming something terrible had happened to his mother. Thomas immediately got out of bed and rushed to the living room, where he found his son shivering and seemingly in shock. When Lucas finally spoke, his words sent a chill through his father's body. "Mom is dead." Without hesitation, Thomas called 911. Police were immediately dispatched to both Thomas's home and to Becky's address on Oakwood Drive. What they discovered at the latter location would haunt even the most seasoned officers for years to come. It was something straight out of a horror movie, recalled Officer Daniel Martinez, one of the first responders on the scene. The victim's face was disfigured beyond recognition. "I've been on the force for 15 years and I've never seen anything like it." Becky Harmon had been brutally murdered in her own bed. Initial reports suggested that a shotgun had been used in the attack, but investigators would soon discover that the killer had employed multiple weapons in what appeared to be a frenzied assault. Meanwhile, at Thomas Harmon's home, detectives began the process of interviewing the traumatized teenager who claimed to have discovered his mother's body. Lucas's story seemed straightforward. He had fallen asleep watching movies in the living room and was awakened by strange noises. When he investigated, he witnessed an unknown intruder attacking his mother. Terrified, he fled the house and ran to his father's home several miles away. It was a harrowing tale of a son narrowly escaping the fate that befell his mother. There was just one problem: almost none of it was true. As detectives sat across from the 16-year-old in the interrogation room, they had no idea they were about to witness one of the most chilling performances they would ever encounter. The following interrogation footage, never before seen by the public, reveals the methodical mind of a teenager trying to conceal the unthinkable. Hi Lucas, I'm Detective Wilson. Were you at your mom's house tonight? Were you sleeping? The detective begins. I'm on my couch, on my chair, Lucas responds, his voice quiet and seemingly uncertain. I sometimes fell asleep watching the movies. I understand. And where was your mom when you were sleeping or hanging out? Was she in her room? She's in her room. When was the last time you saw her? What time? 9 o'clock, I believe. Came home from my friend Jason's. And that's when you saw your mom? Yeah, she was in her bed. Was she fine and awake when you talked to her? Yeah, she was in her bed. The detective assures Lucas that help is on the way to check on his mother, though both men know it's far too late for any medical intervention. What's notable about this initial exchange is Lucas's demeanor. He appears distressed but controlled, his responses measured despite the horrific situation he's describing. Dr. Turner would later note, what we see in this early footage is Lucas's attempt to establish his narrative. He's careful to place himself away from the crime scene, in the living room, not near his mother's bedroom, and to establish that he last saw her alive and well. These are calculated details designed to distance himself from the murder. As the interrogation continues, the detectives begin to apply more pressure, sensing inconsistencies in Lucas's story. Lucas, we've been to the house, okay? So we kind of have an understanding of what happened, one detective says. And like I told you before, we kind of know a little bit about everything that went on tonight before we even came in to talk to you. You understand that? Lucas nods rapidly, a nonverbal cue that psychologists identify as a sign of anxiety rather than agreement. The detective continues, suggesting they rewind to earlier in the evening, implying that Lucas's current version of events doesn't align with the evidence they've gathered. It's at this point that the interrogation takes a dramatic turn. The second detective in the room, a veteran homicide investigator with 30 years of experience, interrupts with a more direct approach. I've been working homicides for 30 years and there's a couple things I need to tell you, he says firmly. Everybody makes mistakes in life, okay? And I want you to listen to me. You've made a big mistake, and we understand. The detective then makes a bold claim. You don't know that there wasn't a surveillance van outside that house that we've had planted there working on somebody else. It has a 360-degree camera facing on your front door. Nobody went in or out of your house period except you. This is a standard interrogation technique suggesting the existence of evidence that may or may not actually exist. In this case, there was no surveillance van, but the detective is watching carefully for Lucas's reaction to this claim. Secondarily, the detective continues, I know your fascination with Mr. Ellis and the whole thing there. This reference to Bret Easton Ellis, the author of American Psycho, clearly strikes a nerve with Lucas. His body language shifts, and for the first time in the interrogation, he appears genuinely unsettled. The detective presses further. What he's saying is, we know what happened. Everybody makes mistakes. You hurt your mother, and I know you did. Lucas's response is immediate and defensive. Why would I hurt her? That's what we're here to talk about. Why? The detective replies. What follows is a fascinating psychological dance as Lucas attempts to maintain his innocence while the detectives methodically chip away at his story. When asked if he knows the difference between right and wrong, Lucas responds confidently, of course I do. When asked if he believes in God, his answer is a simple no. This exchange marks a turning point in the interrogation. Lucas's demeanor changes dramatically, his speech pattern alters, he adopts a different accent, and his body language becomes more animated. It's as if the mention of his literary hero has triggered something within him. You're not listening to me, Lucas says, his voice taking on an unnatural cadence. If you say you know the difference between right and wrong, then the judge is going to have to make a decision on what to do with this answer. The detectives, sensing they're getting closer to a breakthrough, press harder on Lucas's fascination with American Psycho. Tell me about this book, one detective demands. Lucas's response is passionate and revealing. Have you never even heard about books like these? Do you not understand the concept of the business world itself? Tell me, what does Patrick Bateman do? Anyone that gets in his way, he knocks out. What do big businesses in Wall Street do? What does Walmart do to the mom-and-pop shops? They knock it out. His voice rising with intensity, Lucas continues, you got to understand, I'm in AP English. I've been analyzing this stuff beyond belief because this is my author study. This outburst provides a disturbing glimpse into Lucas's mindset. He's not just a fan of American Psycho, he's internalized its nihilistic philosophy, drawing parallels between fictional murder and corporate competition. More concerning still, he seems to admire the character's ruthless approach to eliminating obstacles. The detectives recognize this as a potential opening and shift their questioning to focus on Lucas's conscience. Do you have a conscience? Do you feel bad about what happened in there? One asks. I'm not sure you do, the detective continues without waiting for an answer. I'm not sure you feel bad about what happened in there. This accusation seems to affect Lucas deeply. For the first time, he appears genuinely emotional, though whether from guilt or the stress of maintaining his facade remains unclear. As the interrogation progresses, the detectives continue to press Lucas on his relationship with his mother. They've learned from interviews with friends and family that Becky and Lucas's relationship had deteriorated significantly in recent months. Becky, a dedicated nurse and by all accounts a loving mother, had become increasingly concerned about her son's behavior. According to her colleagues at Pinecrest Memorial Hospital, she had confided that Lucas was becoming more secretive, spending hours alone in his room watching disturbing films and lifting weights. She was worried about him, recalled Jennifer Adams, a fellow nurse who had worked with Becky for over a decade. She said he was changing, becoming someone she didn't recognize. The sweet boy she raised was disappearing, and she didn't know how to reach him anymore. Becky's concerns were well-founded. In the months leading up to her murder, Lucas had undergone a dramatic transformation. Once a high-achieving student with a passion for literature and film, he had narrowed his interests to focus almost exclusively on stories of violence and psychological manipulation. His physical appearance had changed as well. The formerly slight teenager had begun an intense bodybuilding regimen, gaining significant muscle mass in a short period. Friends later reported that he was drinking protein shakes constantly and may have been using steroids, though toxicology reports would neither confirm nor deny this. He was obsessed with getting bigger, said Jason Parker, the friend Lucas claimed to have visited on the night of the murder. He would flex in front of mirrors, talk about how weak he used to be. It was like he was trying to become someone else entirely. What Jason didn't know, what no one knew, was that Lucas's physical transformation was part of a larger psychological shift. He wasn't just building muscle, he was constructing a new identity, one inspired by the fictional Patrick Bateman. In Lucas's mind, Patrick Bateman represented everything he wanted to be, explained Dr. Turner. Powerful, feared, in control. The character's ability to compartmentalize, to be a respected professional while secretly indulging his violent urges, appealed to a teenager who felt powerless in his own life. This fascination with compartmentalization would prove central to understanding both the murder and Lucas's behavior during the interrogation. Like the character he idolized, Lucas believed he could commit a horrific act and then simply switch to another version of himself, the shocked, grieving son who discovered his mother's body. Back in the interrogation room, the detectives continue to press Lucas on inconsistencies in his story. They point out that forensic evidence doesn't support his claim of an intruder, that the house showed no signs of forced entry, and that neighbors reported hearing no unusual sounds until Lucas himself left the house. Faced with mounting evidence against him, Lucas's carefully constructed facade begins to crack. His responses become more erratic, his body language more agitated. He alternates between defensive outbursts and periods of eerie calm. You don't understand, he insists repeatedly. You don't understand what it's like. What's like, Lucas? A detective asks. Living with her. Living with the constant disappointment. This is the first hint of Lucas's true motive. A deep-seated resentment toward his mother that had been building for years. As the interrogation continues, more details emerge about the troubled relationship between mother and son. According to Lucas, Becky was overly controlling, constantly criticizing his interests and trying to shape him into someone he didn't want to be. He describes feeling suffocated by her expectations and her attempts to get him psychological help, which he viewed as further evidence that she didn't accept him for who he was. She wanted to change me, he says, his voice a mixture of anger and hurt. She thought there was something wrong with me because I wasn't like everyone else. The detectives listen carefully, recognizing that they're finally hearing something close to the truth. They encourage Lucas to continue, to explain what happened on the night of January 24th. What follows is one of the most chilling confessions ever recorded in a Montana interrogation room. I was watching the movie again. Lucas begins, his voice now eerily calm. American Psycho, the scene where Patrick takes the axe to Paul Allen. This is my favorite part. The way he moves, so precise, so in control. Mom came in and started yelling about it being a school night, about the movie being inappropriate. Lucas describes how the argument escalated. with Becky threatening to take away his computer and contact his therapist about his obsession with the film. According to Lucas, something inside him just snapped. "It was like I was watching myself from outside my body," he explains. "I followed her to her room. She was sitting on the bed, her back to me. She didn't even hear me come in." The details that follow are too graphic to recount in full, but Lucas describes attacking his mother first with a knife he had been keeping in his room, a replica of one used in the film, and then with other implements when she tried to defend herself. The frenzied attack continued long after Becky had stopped moving. "I wanted to see what it felt like," Lucas says, his voice devoid of emotion. "In the movie, Patrick feels nothing. He just does it and moves on. I wanted to know if I could do that too." Perhaps most disturbing is what Lucas did after the murder. Rather than immediately fleeing or calling for help, he returned to his room and continued watching American Psycho, allowing his mother's body to grow cold as he immersed himself once more in his favorite fictional world. It was only hours later, in the early morning, that he decided to construct his story about an intruder and make his way to his father's house. The walk through freezing temperatures was not, as he initially claimed, a desperate flight from danger, but rather a calculated move to establish his alibi. "I thought about what Patrick would do," Lucas explains. "He always has a plan. He's always thinking ahead." The confession, delivered with such clinical detachment, sends chills through the interrogation room. The detectives, despite their years of experience with violent criminals, are visibly disturbed by the teenager's lack of remorse and his apparent inability to distinguish between fiction and reality. "Do you understand what you've done?" one detective asks. "Do you understand that your mother is dead and you killed her?" Lucas's response is perhaps the most chilling moment of the entire interrogation. "Of course I understand. I'm not crazy. Patrick isn't crazy either. We just see the world differently than you do." This statement would later become central to the prosecution's case against Lucas. Despite his young age, they would argue that he fully understood the nature and consequences of his actions, that his crime was not the result of a psychotic break but of a calculated decision to act out his violent fantasies. The defense, however, would paint a very different picture. They would argue that Lucas was suffering from a severe mental illness, exacerbated by possible steroid use and an unhealthy obsession with a fictional character. They would point to his history of social isolation, his increasingly erratic behavior in the months leading up to the murder, and the extreme compartmentalization evident in his ability to commit such a violent act and then appear genuinely distressed when discovering the body. "What we're seeing here is not a cold-blooded killer," argued defense attorney Robert Collins. "We're seeing a deeply troubled young man who lost touch with reality and, in a moment of psychosis, committed an act he would never have been capable of in his right mind." The prosecution countered with evidence of premeditation. The replica knife Lucas had purchased weeks before the murder, internet searches on his computer about perfect murder techniques and how to fake emotions, and journal entries that revealed his growing resentment toward his mother and his fantasies about becoming Patrick. This was not a spontaneous act of violence. Prosecutor Amanda Foster told the jury, "This was a calculated murder committed by a young man who knew exactly what he was doing and took steps to avoid getting caught." The trial, which began in June 2007, captivated the small community of Pinecrest. Many residents struggled to reconcile the image of the quiet, intelligent teenager they thought they knew with the disturbing details that emerged during court proceedings. Lucas's teachers described him as exceptionally bright but increasingly withdrawn. His AP English teacher recalled being concerned about his author study project on Bret Easton Ellis, noting that his analysis focused almost exclusively on justifying Patrick Bateman's actions rather than critically examining the novel's satirical elements. "He seemed to miss the point entirely," the teacher testified. "The novel is a critique of 1980s excess and materialism, but Lucas interpreted it as a handbook for living." He wrote that Patrick Bateman was misunderstood and ahead of his time. Friends testified about Lucas's changing behavior in the months leading up to the murder. They described how he had begun to mimic Patrick Bateman's speech patterns and mannerisms, how he had become obsessed with his appearance and physical strength, and how he would sometimes make disturbing comments that they had dismissed as dark humor. He once told me that he thought it would be interesting to know what it felt like to kill someone. Jason Parker testified. I laughed it off because I thought he was just being edgy. I never imagined he was serious. Perhaps the most damning testimony came from Lucas's father, Thomas. Visibly emotional on the stand, he described his son's deteriorating relationship with Becky and his own failure to recognize the severity of the situation. Becky called me a few weeks before. Before it happened, Thomas testified, his voice breaking. She was worried about Lucas. She said he was watching that movie over and over, that he was talking like the character, dressing like him. She wanted my help getting him into more intensive therapy. Thomas admitted that he had dismissed Becky's concerns as overprotective parenting. I told her it was just a phase, that all teenagers go through periods of identifying with fictional characters. I told her to give him space. The regret in his voice was palpable as he added, if I had listened to her, maybe she'd still be alive. Forensic evidence presented at trial painted a gruesome picture of Becky's final moments. The medical examiner testified that she had suffered multiple stab wounds, primarily to her face and neck, consistent with a frenzied attack rather than a calculated killing. Defense experts suggested this supported their theory of a psychotic episode, while prosecution experts argued it demonstrated the extreme rage Lucas felt toward his mother. Perhaps the most compelling evidence came from Lucas himself. Against the advice of his attorneys, he insisted on taking the stand, apparently confident in his ability to convince the jury of his version of events. What followed was a disturbing performance that likely sealed his fate. On the stand, Lucas alternated between appearing genuinely remorseful and slipping into what observers described as Patrick mode, speaking in the clipped, precise manner of the character and expressing views that seemed lifted directly from the novel. When asked directly why he killed his mother, Lucas's response sent shockwaves through the courtroom. She was holding me back. In the world of Patrick Bateman, obstacles are eliminated. It's just business. After a 3-week trial and 2 days of deliberation, the jury rejected the insanity defense and found Lucas Harmon guilty of first-degree murder. Despite his age, he was sentenced as an adult to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 30 years. The case of Lucas Harmon raises disturbing questions about the influence of media on vulnerable minds, the failure of systems designed to identify and help troubled youth, and the human capacity for compartmentalization. The ability to separate one's actions from one's self-image in ways that enable horrific behavior. What makes this case so disturbing is not just the brutality of the crime, noted Dr. Turner, but the way Lucas was able to construct an alternate reality in which his actions were justified. He didn't just kill his mother, he killed her while playing a role while being someone else in his mind. For the residents of Pinecrest, the case shattered illusions about the safety of their community and forced many to confront uncomfortable questions about the teenagers in their own homes. How well did they really know their children? What were they watching, reading, absorbing? And how could they tell the difference between normal teenage angst and the warning signs of something far more dangerous? The red flags were there, said Detective Wilson in a rare interview years after the case. The obsession with a violent character, the physical transformation, the deteriorating relationship with his mother. But they're the kind of flags that, in isolation, could be dismissed as typical teenage behavior. It's only in hindsight that the pattern becomes clear. Today, Lucas Harmon remains in Montana State Prison. According to prison officials, he continues to alternate between periods of apparent remorse and episodes where he slips back into his Patrick persona. He has been diagnosed with several mental health conditions, including antisocial personality disorder and narcissistic personality disorder, but maintains that he was sane at the time of the murder. In a letter written to a true crime author interested in his case, Lucas expressed no regret for his actions. Patrick Bateman understood something that most people don't, that we're all wearing masks, playing roles. I just chose to play a different role than the one my mother wanted for me. In the end, it's all just business. Becky Harmon's colleagues at Pinecrest Memorial Hospital have established a scholarship in her name for nursing students specializing in mental health care. The annual award includes a commitment to work in adolescent psychiatric services after graduation, a fitting tribute to a woman who recognized her son needed help but couldn't access it in time to save herself. Thomas Harmon has become an advocate for better mental health resources for teenagers, speaking at schools about recognizing warning signs of dangerous obsessions and the importance of taking parental concerns seriously. I failed my ex-wife and I failed my son, Thomas said at a recent presentation. I didn't want to see what was happening because it was easier to believe everything was fine. If sharing our story prevents even one family from experiencing what we've gone through, then some small good will have come from this tragedy. The case has also prompted discussions in educational settings about the responsible teaching of controversial literature and films. Many schools now provide additional context and guidance when assigning works that contain graphic violence or disturbed characters, helping students understand the critical distance necessary when engaging with such material. We can't and shouldn't shelter young people from challenging content, explained Dr. Elizabeth Morgan, a professor of adolescent psychology. But we need to ensure they have the tools to process it appropriately to understand the difference between exploring dark themes artistically and glorifying violence. For those who study criminal psychology, the case of Lucas Harmon represents a perfect storm of risk factors: a troubled adolescent with identity issues, a fascination with violence, access to graphic media that he lacked the maturity to process critically, and insufficient intervention despite clear warning signs. What's particularly troubling about this case is how Lucas used a fictional character as both inspiration and justification, noted criminal psychologist Dr. James Wilson. Patrick Bateman gave him a template for violence and a philosophical framework that, in his mind, made that violence acceptable. This phenomenon, using fiction to rationalize real violence, is rare but not unprecedented. From John Hinckley Jr. S. obsession with Taxi Driver to the Columbine shooter's fixation on violent video games and music, there have been cases where troubled individuals have drawn inspiration from media. However, experts caution against drawing simplistic conclusions about cause and effect. Media doesn't create killers, Dr. Wilson emphasized. Millions of people watch American Psycho without harming anyone. What we're seeing in cases like Lucas's is a perfect storm where media becomes one factor among many, including mental health issues, family dynamics, and personal predispositions that culminate in violence. For the detectives who extracted Lucas's confession, the case remains one of the most disturbing of their careers. The image of a 16-year-old boy calmly describing his mother's murder in terms borrowed from a fictional character continues to haunt them. "I've interviewed a lot of killers," said Detective Wilson. "Most of them have some sense that what they did was wrong, even if they try to justify it. What made Lucas different was his complete detachment, like he was discussing a movie scene rather than something he had actually done. This detachment, this ability to compartmentalize so completely that reality and fiction blur, is perhaps the most chilling aspect of the case. It suggests a mind capable of extraordinary self-deception, of creating alternate realities in which the unthinkable becomes not just possible but logical. As we navigate an increasingly media-saturated world, the case of Lucas Harmon serves as a stark reminder of the complex relationship between fiction and reality, between the stories we consume and the stories we live. For most people, this relationship remains healthy. We engage with dark or violent content while maintaining a clear boundary between imagination and action. But for a small minority, that boundary can become dangerously permeable. The fictional can become a template for the real, with devastating consequences. One teenager's obsession with a fictional character led to a real mother's death. One moment of rage ended a life full of promise and compassion. One family left to navigate the aftermath of a murder that fiction didn't cause but may have inspired. In the complex landscape of human psychology, the line between influence and causation, between inspiration and action, remains as murky as it is crucial to understand. If you found this story impactful, please consider supporting this channel by subscribing. Your subscription truly helps ensure these important stories continue to be told. Like this video if you want others to see it, and comment your location below so we can see where our community is watching from around the world. I'll be back tomorrow with another case that deserves to be examined in full. Until then, stay vigilant, stay safe, and remember, sometimes the most dangerous influences aren't the ones we fear from strangers, but the ones that take root in the minds of those closest to us.